Hello, this is Anastasia Betts, and I am going to talk to you today about my research component study proposal, which is called What Type of Math Parent Are You? And we're going to talk more about what that means. So let's see if I can keep going here. All right, so what type of math parent are you? The development of the MAP reset model for parent type identification in parent math activity participation with their preschool aged children. And let's just get started with our introduction here. All right, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I recorded this last night and it was 48 minutes long. So I'm going to move very quickly through this. And maybe even just summarize each slide. So, some background on this topic and the problem that we have here. In the world of parent child math, many parents don't believe it's that important for them to engage in math activity with their children. They believe it's important for them to promote their young children's literacy, but they aren't as keen to promote their numeracy. This is what's borne out in the research. Yet, what we know from the research is that parent child math interaction supports child math learning and increases their achievement on math related topics. So, as stakeholders in education, we're keenly interested in ways that we can increase parent child math interactions. So, let's see what the next thing is. All right, so the problem is that parent child interaction on math related topics positively impacts student achievement, but parents interact very little on math related topics with their children. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. The question is, how can we better understand the factors that influence parent child math interactions influence parent decisions to interact with their children so that we can find better ways to increase parent child math related interactions. The purpose of this study is to examine the factors that influence parent choices about whether or not to get involved with their children, and to determine if there are certain types of parents that exhibit similar patterns of influences, and whether or not there is an alignment between certain types of parents and the activities that they seem to prefer. So, for example, do certain types of parents like to do certain types of activities and not other types of activities? And the reason that we want to find this out is because if we know that there's a connection between types of parents and types of activity preferences, we can tailor parent engagement programs to the types of parents we're dealing with. Okay, let's see, where are we? All right, so now we're going to talk about the theoretical framework that underpins all of this. So the primary theoretical framework underneath this study is basically the theory of social learning, and there are three different versions of it that we're going to talk about. But the first one comes from Bandura, and Bandura talked about the idea that that children learn by observing their environment, and that there is the existence of models who are important individuals in the child's life upon whom the child bases their behavior, or who they seek to imitate. And they learn how to behave by receiving positive and negative feedback on their imitated behavior. So, also in that same camp is the social learning theory of the family, which examines connections between student learning in the home environment and the ways in which parental expectations influence the child's performance. And then lastly, we have Vygotsky and the social cultural learning theory, and the idea that the parent is the child's first teacher, and that the parent helps the child grow by supporting the child in activities that the child can't do alone. So, for example, if a child is, I'll go back to the very first picture in the introduction, if the child is trying to put those rings on the post, a very, very young child may not be able to do it, but with little prompting and nudging, the parent can help the child learn how to do it, and that's what Vygotsky is talking about. So Vygotsky has a special name for the space between what the child can do alone and what the child can do with help. And he calls that space the zone of proximal development. We often refer to it as the ZPD. And that zone is really important because that's where the most learning, it's the most optimal learning space for the child. It's just a little bit above what the child can do independently, and with just a little bit of help from the more knowledgeable other, the child is able to really learn a lot. So what's cool about the ZPD in terms of this study is that parent-child activities most often occur in the child's ZPD because the child's trying to do something, they may be struggling, they maybe need a little help, and so the parent steps in and helps them out and provides some scaffolding and support. And the child learns a lot from that. So the activities, as I said before, the activities in the child's ZPD are those most likely to result in optimal learning for the child. And that's why parents have such an important role to play in helping their children learn. So now we'll move on to the literature review. So achievement in mathematics is super important. It's critical to the success of students in school and also later in life. And the research shows that success in school mathematics leads to higher rates of graduation, enrollment in college, and better paying careers. But the problem is that kids aren't achieving in math. In fact, many kids are failing to achieve in mathematics. The NAEP showed, the most recent NAEP showed that even if we just look at the fourth graders, that nearly 2/3 of fourth graders are failing to achieve grade level proficiency. And what we know from long range trends of the NAEP and also other studies, but the long range trends of NAEP show that students who start ahead tend to stay ahead, and students who start behind tend to stay behind. And that's the part that I really want to focus on. Those who start behind stay behind. So let's talk about the importance of early childhood mathematics, or where you start. So early mastery of in pre-K or kindergarten of key mathematics competencies is a predictor of later school success. For example, skills, we call them advanced counting skills. Skills such as count all, count on, count forward, count backward from any number within 10, and counting beyond 10 were the most predictive skills of later achievement in fifth grade and in middle school. And that comes out of these studies, Claessens and Ingold, Duncan et al., and Nguyen et al. Those three studies were able to show that those advanced counting skills really do matter in predicting later achievement in school. But not all kids start school with the same level of skills or knowledge in math. In fact, there are wide disparities in children's math knowledge at school entry. And researchers think that the reason for this is that kids prior to beginning school are in the home environment, and home environments differ greatly from family to family. We call it the home numeracy environment. The enrichment level of the child's home may be very different from another child's enrichment. And so a child who's in a home that's exposed to puzzles and games and shared counting experiences with parents and older siblings is going to arrive at school with a very different skill set than a child who's had none of that. And we see these deficits a lot more prevalent in some populations than others. For example, children from low SES backgrounds, or children with lower parental education levels, etc. So the home numeracy environment. What is the home numeracy environment? Well, the home numeracy environment consists of the values, beliefs, knowledge, background, experience, physical resources, practices, and attitudes in the home that promote the development of children's numeracy skills. And those things affect the parents' decisions to participate in math activity with their kids. So I've created, just for the use in this paper and also for the model we're trying to develop a new acronym called MAP, M-A-P-P, which stands for the Mathematical Activity Participation of Parents. And that's really what we're studying here, is what factors influence the mathematical activity participation of parents, or the MAP. Well, parent-child engagement through math related activities is one important part of the home numeracy environment. And we know from studies that increased parent-child math activity participation has been shown to be significantly correlated with better child math performance. So what do we mean by math activity? It could be potentially anything related to math. It could be playing board games, or playing cards, or counting out the grapes to share, or cutting a sandwich in half, or counting pennies from a penny bank. And over here in this corner here, I've sort of created a definition. Mathematical activity is defined by the author of this study as any kind of interaction, conversation, or activity that involves concepts of number and the use of number-related vocabulary. All right. So there's lots of positive findings in the studies of MAP, Mathematical Activity Participation of Parents. And I've listed just a few here. So Kleeman and colleagues found that parent-child activities and parents' numeracy expectations predicted early number skills in their children. Berkowitz and colleagues found improved math outcomes for children with parents who engaged in as little as one bedtime story per week, just one, and 3 months of additional growth for children of math-anxious parents over the control group. Gunderson and Levine discovered that certain kinds of number talk was more predictive of children's later number knowledge, and Lefebvre and colleagues found that when parents interacted more frequently with their children to explicitly teach and model early numeracy skills, their children experienced higher math achievement in school. And in an additional study, Lefebvre and colleagues found a positive correlation between the frequency of the interactions and the child's math achievement. But there's some troubling findings in the studies as well. For example, Misal and colleagues found that there was a lot of variability in the frequency of math activities in the home, with some parents reporting that they had daily activities and others reporting no interactions at all. And this was also found in Levine and colleagues who studied, I'm going to provided more data on that because that study was so interesting here. They did a longitudinal study of preschool children where they observed the naturalistic interactions and talk between primary caregivers and the children from age 14 months to 30 months old. And across that time period, they had done 7 hours of observation for each child. And the total the total count of words during those 7 hours was 18,000 words. But the number word usage in those 18,000 words ranged from as little as 4 words out of 18,000 words to 257, which is still really low. However, even with those low numbers, they found that number talk remained a significant predictor of later cardinal number knowledge. So the parents who had more number talk, their kids did better, and the parents had less number talk, their kids did less well. Something that's true of the literature base for MAP is that the findings are pretty mixed as well. Even though there's a lot of really strong positive results, there's also some mixed results. For example, Huntsinger and colleagues found a correlation between the child's math performance and parents' attitudes and teaching styles, in that more positive and more direct teaching resulted in better math performance. But Blevins, Knob, and Moose and Miller found some positive correlations for parent-child activities, but negative correlations for other activities. Parents' direct teaching of basic math concepts, which directly contradicts Huntsinger and colleagues' result. So these are just two examples of some mixed findings, but there are other findings out there that are mixed as well. But we have studies with positive results listed here, but also other studies with negative results. So the question that I kept asking as a researcher is why the mixed result? Why is the literature so mixed? Well, a recent literature study done by Blevins Knab, she pointed out that it's a relatively new field of study. There have been very few studies in the 80s and 90s. You could count them on two hands. More in the 2000s and more in the 2010s. But even so, there's no common language or tools or instruments and no best practices. And the factors that influence MAP, mathematical activity participation of parents, are just simply not well understood. There's other things, other limitations in the research. The limitations among the samples, they're typically small, they're mostly westernized, largely white populations and largely middle class, and mostly comprised of convenient samples made of volunteers. There's limitations in the content too. A lot of them focus on explicit math activities, even though most of the math and numeracy activities that happen outside of the classroom is implicit. They focus a lot on number sense instead of other strands like measurement and spatial reasoning and geometry. And as I said, a lack of consistent language. And then there's problems with the methods as well, reliance on self-reporting, lab studies that are not authentic, the fact that it's just a complex topic to understand and it's difficult to untangle to create good studies. And there's, as I mentioned, no standardized tools or instruments or accepted theoretical frameworks and very few longitudinal studies. So let's talk about my conceptual framework here. How can we develop a better way to study the math activity participation of parents? Well, we can start by looking at studies involving parent-child literacy engagement. That's very well studied, and we can start there. We can examine models of parental involvement, and we can identify factors that might be influencing parental decisions to participate in math activities with their children. So let's look at each one of those individually. So looking to literacy as an example. The home literacy environment is doing very well. Decades of research and messaging have largely worked because many parents now believe literacy to be more important. They believe it to be really important, and some parents believe it's more important than numeracy, which is not the case, but that's been the messaging. Many parents believe that it's their job to develop their child's literacy, especially in the early years, but they don't feel that way about numeracy. So we need to do a better job of messaging the importance of the home numeracy environment. We know that parent-child literacy, from all this research that's been done, we know that parent-child literacy engagement, it positively impacts child reading. So there's no reason to believe that the same would not be true of math activity participation, even though the research is a little bit mixed. So we really need to understand more. We need to better understand the factors that influence math activity participation of parents. So one way to begin to understand that is to just simply look at parental involvement in children's education, period, in general. So Hoover, Dempsey, and Sandler developed a 5-level model for examining factors that influence parental involvement. The bottom 2 levels of their model deal with the factors that influence parental decisions to become involved and the form that involvement might take. The top 3 levels focus on the impact of those decisions on the child's performance. For the purposes of this study, I'm only concerned with the bottom 2 levels. What are the factors that influence a parent's decision to interact and impact the form that interaction might take? So let's look deeper at the level 1 and 2 of Hoover, Dempsey, and Sandler's model. So Hoover, Dempsey, and Sandler broke it down into these 3 major categories here in level 1. The parent's motivational beliefs, which included parental role construction and self-efficacy. And then over here, the parents' perceived life context, their perceived time of time and energy, and their perceived knowledge and skills. And then there was this third category in the middle, which had to do with invitations. Does the school expect the parent to be involved? Does the teacher expect the parent to be involved? Does the child invite the parent to be involved? All of those things contribute to a parent's decisions to become involved and the forms in which that involvement might take. So I took this framework from Hoover and Dempsey, and I created a new framework that it's not really new, but I took the Hoover-Dempsey factors and also the idea of parental expectations and created a new framework that I want to use to explicitly study math activity participation of parents. And I'm calling it the RESET framework because RESET makes it really easy to remember. So RESET stands for role, for perceived role construction. And that, if you don't know what that is, that means what does the parent believe about his or her role as a parent? What is a parent supposed to do? And that influences what the parent then does, whatever he believes a parent is supposed to do. So R for role, E for self-efficacy, S for skills and knowledge, E for expectations. That was the thing that was added into the Hoover-Dempsey. I added that in addition to the Hoover-Dempsey characteristics. And T for time and energy. And ultimately what I want to do is I want to measure parent characteristics along these dimensions to find out, can we characterize parents? For example, a parent might score high on role and maybe low on efficacy and maybe middle of the ground on skills and so on. And maybe that's a pattern that a lot of parents exhibit. We don't know. That's what we want to find out. So let's talk about the study now. This is an exploratory mixed method study. It's exploratory because as I mentioned before, the field of study is very, very new and young. It's kind of like the wild, wild west out there. And when things aren't really established, you want to explore to gain more knowledge and gain more understanding of the design territory. And that's what we're trying to do. In this case, the aim is to develop tools and instruments that can be used for future study in this area. In other words, a means of measuring parental characteristics and maybe cohorting them into types of parents. And it's mixed methods because we want to collect qualitative data that can help us not only confirm some ideas that we have, but also maybe gather data about ideas that we haven't had yet. Maybe we'll discover something in the qualitative data that we weren't thinking about. And quantitative data that we can use to effectively measure parent characteristics and also identify correlations between those and activity preferences. My main questions are what types of parents can be identified according to their patterns of responses as measured by the MAP RESET model. What relationship might exist between parent types and the kinds of math activities they say they prefer to participate in. And my hypotheses are parent types do exist and can be identified using this MAP RESET model. And parents of the same or similar type are more likely to participate in activities that are aligned to their type. My hypothesis is that they'll show similar preferences for types of activities. So this is the flow of the study, and I'm going to walk you, I know there's a lot on this page, but I'm going to walk you through it like one phase at a time. So up here I have my research questions, what types of parents can be identified and what relationships exist between parent type and parent activity preference. And then we go to phase 1, where it will, and I'll dig into each of these parts more as we get out of this, but I just want to run you through the flow of the study. So we'll start with sample 1, which is a small sample of 30 parents of 4 to 5-year-olds. We'll use a semi-structured interview and survey. We'll engage in qualitative analysis and hopefully confirmation of a priori themes from the MAP RESET model, and identify new or emergent themes that we haven't thought of. And all of this information will be used to help further development of the survey instrument that we want to use in the second part of the study. So as I mentioned, we're going to use all the information from phase 1 to create the survey instrument and finalize the survey instrument. Once that's done, we'll move on to phase 3, which is a sample of hopefully over 300 parents of 4 to 5 year olds. This part of the study will be done digitally. The survey will be delivered digitally. The data will be collected through the survey. We'll engage in both qualitative analysis of open questions and quantitative analysis of the closed questions. And then after that, we will triangulate all of the data from both phases of the study and then come to some conclusions about what we've discovered. So let's talk a little bit more about the samples. Sample 1 is 20 to 30 parents of 4 to 5 year old school-ready children. That means they haven't started kindergarten yet. It's a convenient sample made of parents that have physically come to my place of work. I work at a place called Age of Learning. We create educational online educational products for kids. So we always have parents bringing children in to test our products. So while the children are play testing, I'm going to use that time to interview the parents. Normally the parents are just sitting on the couch waiting for their child to be done play testing. So I thought this was a really great opportunity to actually interview the parents and get some additional data. The interview I plan to have be around 30 minutes long. The sample is likely to be, homogenous in terms of geography. They're mostly parents from the LA area, and it's likely to be a less diverse population than I would like, mostly because these are parents who are volunteering to bring their kids in to play test. So they're probably more middle class, upper SES, and likely to be very involved parents. And then sample 2 for the latter part of the study would be 300 plus parents of 4 to 5 year old school ready children. That number was selected because we need 300 or more for factor analysis, which is part of the quantitative methods that we're using, or that I'm using. And the sample will be provided by a market research firm for the purposes of this study. And we can specify to the market research firm what demographics we want, or what's the makeup of the sample. They are not a random sample. They are pulled from the market research's database of volunteers. So again, we still have volunteer bias that we're dealing with. The instruments for this study are 2. There's 2 primary instruments. There's one that is the semi-structured interview, protocol and survey, and the second instrument, which is the map reset survey, that needs to be developed. And I think I'm anticipating that some of the development of the second tool, the survey, will come out of the work that we do in the semi-structured interview protocol. Data collection with sample 1, I will record the conversations or the interview that I do with them. There will be a paper component to it where I ask them to write down their thoughts, so I'll collect that. And I'll also have my interview notes that I take during the interview. And for sample 2, the data collection will be this digital survey and questionnaire responses. So for the qualitative data analysis, I'm rooting it in, grounded theory asks that the theory emerge from what the data tells us. But we also know that we can use the data to confirm our a priori themes and hypotheses, as well as notice new themes that might emerge. So we will look for confirmation of our a priori themes and ideas. We will identify emerging themes and ideas and identify potential gaps in the framework and make judgments about how to adjust the model. The quantitative data analysis that we do on sample 2, we will use confirmatory factor analysis to confirm the loading of the survey items onto the construct factors on the reset framework. And we'll use Cronbach's alpha to test the reliability of the construct indicators. And then we'll use cluster analysis to group parents into cohorts according to their similar survey responses, and then use Pearson's R to test the strength of correlations between parent cohorts and their stated activity preferences. So, discussion. So, the significance of this study is that it seeks to fill in some key gaps in the research. For example, the home numeracy environment is vastly understudied, and there's only a limited number of studies on parent-child math interactions, and I found no studies that actually looked at types of parents and the types of preferred modes of interaction. So this is something, an entirely new take on parent-child math activity. The study provides important data on the nature of parent involvement in math specifically, and the relationship between parental beliefs, values, attitudes, and their practices in form of their math activity participation. And the findings from this study are really, really important on a number of fronts. The validation of the map reset model could add to the field in terms of an instrument or a tool that can be used in further studies, in future studies. And as we said, the field is lacking tools and instruments. So this could create an actual tool that other researchers could use to in their studies. But beyond that, the information that we find is going to be used to create a parent engagement app as a companion to a math mastery program for pre-K through second grade students. So there is this program called Mastering Math that my company produces. It's for basically 4 to 7 year old children, and it promotes mastery of early number sense competencies. We want to create a parent app that is a companion to this app that gets parents involved and engaged with doing math, participating in math with their children. So the information that we get from the study will help us tailor that map to individual kinds of parents. As I said, we have this hypothesis, there's these different kinds of parents. Well, in Mastering Math, we completely individualize that program for each individual child, giving them what they need in terms of their math learning trajectory. We want to do the same thing for parents. We want to have a parent app that individualizes to the needs of the parent in order to have it be more likely that that parent will engage with their child and by participating in math activities together. And I think that, the findings from the study could also potentially inform the creation of parent engagement programs for schools. Schools really struggle to increase parent involvement, especially when it comes to math. And the information that we find in the study could potentially help with that as well. There are some limitations, though, of this study. Sample 1's likely to not be representative of the broader population of parents, and was likely to have an overrepresentation, as I said, of parents of middle income, higher education levels, and beliefs and values supportive of parental involvement. So making too many adjustments to the reset or the map reset model or survey based on that one sample could be a little risky. So we're going to have to use some judgment when we do that. Sample 2 may be more representative because we can specify the parameters for inclusion in the study, but it's still not a random sample, and it's made up of parents who've volunteered to take part in research. So as a result, conclusions from this study can't really be generalized to the broader population. However, the conclusions from the study can further our understanding of mathematical activity participation of parents, and could be used to drive further research with more representative samples. And there's limitations in the instruments too. The initial items that I plan to include on the surveys will be assembled from other research studies that had surveys in them. But again, they haven't necessarily been validated. They've only just been tested. And the survey instrument that I'm using in this study has not been validated, but that's actually the purpose of this study, is to try and validate the survey instrument. And delimitations and future directions. Well, the scope of the study is, by design is narrow. We only have two samples: the 30 parent sample 1 and the 300 parent sample 2. And neither sample is likely to include any significant number of at-risk populations. And the study specifically looks at school-ready children ages 4 to 5 years old, not any other age, just that age. And it focuses on parents' self-reported activity preferences. It doesn't examine what parents actually do. Basically we're collecting information on what parents say they do. We're not actually collecting information on what they actually do, but that piece is actually what I want to do for my dissertation. I want to actually look at what parents are actually doing. So that's for later. But the first step for me is trying to validate the survey instrument where we can identify cohorts of parent types. So future directions for research could be compare parents' reports of activity preferences to their actual math activity practices. That's, as I mentioned, something that I want to do in my dissertation. We can examine different populations of parents to see if different parent types exist in different populations, and if correlations between parent types and activity types hold true. And we can examine parents of older children to see what differences in parent type and parent activity preference might exist for parents of older children versus parents of younger children. So in conclusion, a summary of why this matters. Developing key math competencies early is one of the best predictors of later math achievement in school for children. But unfortunately, not all children arrive at school ready to learn, and this is often as a result of a lack of enrichment in the home numeracy environment. And parent-child math engagement is one really important component of the home numeracy environment, that if we could increase parent-child math activity participation, we are likely to increase children's math achievement as well. So the study is important because it helps us understand the factors that influence parents' decisions to participate in math with their children. And it helps us identify relationships between parent characteristics that are related to math activity participation and their preferred activity participation in math. And with this information, we can create better parent engagement programs that can help increase parent-child math activity participation, and as a consequence, increase child math achievement. And so that's it. So lastly, I just want to say thank you. A lot of people have been super helpful to me in creating this study proposal. And I want to thank Dr. Sun and also my husband who's put up with me, and then my mentor Dave Hendry and my colleague Diana Hughes and the rest of my colleagues who've really helped me figure out what the study needed to be. Megan, Liz, Heejin, and Kelly. Thank you all so much, and I really, really appreciate everything you did to help me out on this. So I'm posting the PowerPoint also, so you'll get to see all of my references. But as of now, that is it. So I'm signing off. Thank you so much for sticking with me through the whole thing.